The morning light over Springfield filtered softly through lace curtains, painting the kitchen in quiet gold. Margaret Hollis moved slowly, careful with her coffee cup, as if it were the only fragile thing left in her world. The house had grown too quiet since her husband's passing 3 years earlier, and now even the clock seemed to tick, just to remind her of time she could never get back. The phone on the counter buzzed, flashing her son's name. Ethan. She smiled automatically, though her chest tightened. "Mom," he began, his voice warm, smooth, practiced. "Chloe's not been well lately, the doctor says. She might need to stay off her feet for a while. They're worried about the baby." Margaret froze. "The baby?" "Yes," Ethan replied quickly, the sound of soft movement and murmuring in the background. "It's been rough, Mom. And I hate to even ask this, but we're falling behind on bills. I need a little help just till the next paycheck." She didn't hesitate, and her mind flashed every scraped knee she had bandaged, every late night she had spent studying medical textbooks while working double shifts to feed him. Her boy, her only child, was having a child of his own. How could she say no? "Of course," she said, her voice gentle. "How much do you need?" He exhaled dramatically as if embarrassed. "Maybe $280,000. It sounds like a lot, but with hospital fees and the new house, Ethan," she interrupted softly. "You don't have to explain. I trust you within an hour." She had called the bank years of careful saving, money, her late husband, and she had built for retirement, gone with a few quiet clicks. When she pressed send, her fingers trembled, with something between pride and relief. After the transfer, Ethan's tone brightened. "Thank you, Mom. You're a lifesaver, really. Just promise me," she said, smiling faintly. "You'll take care of her and the baby always," he replied. "You'll be the best grandma in Missouri." Margaret's eyes filled. "I love you, Ethan," he chuckled. "Love you too, Mom. Gotta run, Chloe's calling." The line clicked. She stood there for a while, staring at the fading call screen. Then, just as she was about to set the phone down, another sound came, faint voices still connected. Her heart skipped. Ethan must have forgotten to hang up. A woman's laugh floated through. Finally, the old woman sent the money. It was Chloe's voice, bright and cruel. Margaret's breath caught. "She's too easy," Ethan said, tone sharp, now stripped of warmth. "Told you all we had to do was fake a pregnancy." Chloe giggled. "You're terrible but smart." The phone slipped slightly in Margaret's grasp. The room blurred, spinning between disbelief and nausea. She pressed a trembling hand to her chest as the call finally went silent. For a long time she didn't move. The ticking clock grew louder, drilling into her thoughts, while she sat by the window nursing cold tea. Her computer pinged an anonymous email with no subject line. Inside one sentence, "Check your name in the insurance database." Margaret's pulse thundered in her ears. She didn't sleep that night. 2 days later, a soft knock came at Margaret's front door. When she opened it, she was met with 2 wide smiles, Ethan holding a bouquet of daisies and Chloe glowing in a pastel dress that seemed rehearsed for innocence. "Mom," Ethan's voice carried forced cheer. "We thought we'd surprise you." Margaret tucked a strand of grey hair behind her ear and stepped aside. "Well, isn't this a pleasant surprise?" she said quietly. Her tone was calm, but her mind replayed every word she'd overheard. They entered, filling the space with artificial warmth. Chloe placed a basket on the counter. "Vitamins, fruit, imported teas for your health," she said sweetly, brushing Margaret's arm. "You have no idea how often Ethan talks about you." Margaret smiled faintly. Of course he does, she thought, when there's money to talk about. They settled in the living room. Ethan's eyes wandered around, landing on framed photos, his childhood baseball team, his late father, and the family home he now clearly coveted. "Mom," he began casually, "our apartment's been kind of cramped late." "Ely, the rent's ridiculous, and with Chloe expecting." He gave a fake sigh. "We thought maybe we could stay here for a while, just until we save enough for the baby's room." Chloe leaned forward, her hands folded neatly. "We'd help around the house, of course, cooking, cleaning. I know you get lonely, Helen." Margaret's lips twitched at the name slip. Margaret, she corrected softly. But yes, I do get lonely. She smiled. Stay as long as you like. The couple exchanged a quick, triumphant glance. That evening, while they unpacked, Margaret stood at her kitchen sink, staring through the window at the magnolia tree outside. The wind rustled its leaves gently. Her husband had planted it decades ago. You always told me to be careful with trust, she whispered. I should have listened. By the third day, Chloe's politeness had hardened into entitlement. You really should think about transferring the house deed to Ethan, she said one morning over coffee. It'll make taxes easier, less stress for you. Ethan nodded in agreement, pretending concern. You're retired now. Mum, let me handle things. It's just paperwork. Margaret smiled, faintly stirring sugar into her tea. That's thoughtful, dear. I'll look into it that night when the house fell silent. Margaret unlocked her old oak desk and pulled out 2 identical sets of papers. One was a non-binding property transfer intent form, the kind that looked official but held no legal weight. The other was the real deed, which she slipped into an envelope and hid behind her late husband's framed photograph. As she closed the drawer, a faint creak echoed from behind her. She turned through the cracked door. She saw Chloe's shadow retreating down the hall. Quiet, deliberate, Margaret's pulse stayed steady. She didn't confront her, not yet. Instead, she took a notepad and wrote in delicate cursive, "The only thing more dangerous than an ungrateful child is a parent who finally stops forgiving." She placed the note inside the desk drawer, locked it, and whispered into the still air. Let's see how far they'll go. Outside. Thunder rolled faintly across the Missouri plains, the kind that warns a storm is coming. The days that followed carried a strange, heavy stillness. Ethan and Chloe had made themselves perfectly at home. Margaret's once orderly house now echoed with footsteps that weren't hers, laughter that didn't belong, and the faint scent of Chloe's expensive perfume lingering in every hallway. They had begun to rearrange things without asking. New curtains, new dishes, even a family photo of themselves placed front and center on the mantel. Each change was small, deliberate, and meant to erase her presence. Piece by piece, Margaret said nothing. She just smiled politely, observed quietly, and memorized everything. Her one companion, the 12-year-old golden retriever named Scout, became her only comfort during those long, uneasy evenings. He'd rest his head on her knee when Chloe's voice grew sharp, or when Ethan made subtle jabs about her forgetfulness. Then one cold morning, Scout didn't come when she called. Margaret searched the kitchen first, then the backyard, then the garden shed. The leash still hung by the door. The food bowl, untouched. Panic rose like a wave. Scout, she called, walking down the gravel driveway. Scout, come boy. Nothing, just the sound of the wind brushing through the maple trees. She turned toward the porch and saw Ethan lounging in a chair, sipping coffee, sunglasses perched on his nose like he was on vacation. Ethan, have you seen Scout? She asked, breathless. He didn't look up. Yeah, he said, casually stretching. Took him out this morning. Dropped him off by the river. Margaret froze. What do you mean? Dropped him off? He shrugged. He kept getting in the way, barking, shedding all over the place. He's old Mom. Probably won't last much longer anyway. For a moment she thought she hadn't heard him. Right, you. You left him there alone. Ethan's tone hardened. Mom, don't make a big deal out of it. You should be thanking me. The house is quieter now. Something inside her cracked so sharply she almost heard. It. She felt the blood drained from her face as she whispered, "He was all I had left of your father." Ethan sighed, rolling his eyes. "You always say that let it go. He's just a dog." He walked past her into the kitchen, humming, while Chloe's laughter drifted faintly from upstairs. Margaret stood on the porch long after he disappeared. The morning air felt too cold, too still somewhere in the distance. She thought she heard a faint bark, or maybe it was just the wind. That night she didn't cry. She sat in her husband's old armchair, her hands folded neatly in her lap, Her eyes no longer trembled. They sharpened for years. She had forgiven Ethan for everything, the debts, the lies, the arrogance she told herself he was lost. That love could still save him. But tonight she understood. Some people mistake kindness for weakness. Until it's gone forever. She took out a small notebook from her drawer and began to write. Plan 1. Keep calm. Smile. Pretend to trust them too. Find what they're hiding. 3. Make them believe they're winning. By the time the clock struck midnight, Margaret had closed the notebook and looked toward the empty dog bed by the fire. Good night, Scout, she whispered. Mama's going to finish this for both of us. Outside, rain began to fall gently on the roof, steady and relentless, like a promise. The next morning, Margaret was in the kitchen before dawn, humming softly as she cracked eggs into a pan. When Ethan came down, yawning, she greeted him with a cheerful smile. Morning, sweetheart. Sit, I made breakfast. You always like bacon and biscuits. He blinked, surprised. You're in a good mood? I just want us to be a family again, she said lightly, turning off the stove. Her tone was so calm, so convincing that even Chloe, coming down the stairs with her phone in hand, smiled approvingly. It became her new routine. Every day she cooked, cleaned, smiled, listened to Chloe's endless complaints about expecting life to be easy. She even joined them on the porch at night, nodding politely as they bragged about investment opportunities and insurance strategies, but inside, Margaret was taking notes. She began feeding them rich, buttery food, heavy stews, creamy casseroles, syrupy desserts. It looked like love, like comfort. But she had an agenda. Every extra calorie was a quiet act of control, a way to dull their energy, to make them lazy and overconfident. Her patience paid off. Within a week, they had stopped pretending to help around the house. They lounged for hours watching TV and scrolling through their phones, leaving their dishes for her to clean. One afternoon, while dusting the living room, Margaret noticed Ethan's laptop open on the couch. She meant to close it, but a headline on the screen caught her eye. How to claim a life insurance payout quickly in accidental death cases. Her breath hitched slowly. She scrolled down. The page was bookmarked alongside others. Common hiking accidents, fast-acting sedatives, policy beneficiary transfers. A cold wave of nausea rushed through her. Her fingers trembled, but she forced herself to take a photo of the screen. With her phone, then quietly shut the laptop. That evening, she drove into town under the pretense of grocery shopping and stopped at the Silver Cross Mutual Insurance office. The young agent smiled politely. How can I help you today, ma'am? I'd just like to check if there's an active life policy under my name, she said. Her voice steady, though her hands were clammy. The agent typed quickly, then frowned. Yes, there is. Mrs. Hollis, a premium tier plan. Very high coverage. It lists your son, Ethan Hollis, as the sole beneficiary. Margaret's heart went hollow. When was it created? 3 months ago. He replied, quite a significant amount. $1.5 million. She smiled faintly. Thank you, she said, walking out before her legs could fail her. In the parking lot, she leaned against her car and looked up at the cloudy Missouri sky. Her mind was no longer clouded by grief. Only clarity remained when she returned home that night. Chloe greeted her at the door, overly sweet. We're just talking. Ethan thought maybe we could all go hiking this weekend. Mount Harlan, remember that place you loved years ago? Margaret met her eyes and smiled gently. That sounds wonderful. Chloe blinked. Surprised, really, of course, Margaret replied softly, setting her purse down. It'll be nice to get some fresh air. As she walked past them toward her room, her expression never changed, serene, almost tender, but behind her eyes the storm had already begun. When she closed her bedroom door, she whispered to the quiet room, You planned the mountain. I'll bring the ending. The morning air carried the chill of early autumn as they drove west toward Mount Harlan. Mist clung to the trees lining the highway, and the rising sun painted the sky in streaks of pale gold. In the passenger seat, Margaret sat quietly. Her, hands folded over a small backpack, resting on her lap. Ethan hummed along with the radio. Chloe scrolled through her phone, snapping selfies now and then, her bright smile reflected in the window. Mom, Ethan said cheerfully, glancing at her, "You're going to love this trail. It's good for the lungs. I used to come here in college." Margaret smiled faintly. "Oh, I remember your father and I hiked there once, years ago." Her voice was calm, steady, betraying none of the dread. She had tucked deep beneath her skin. The road turned from asphalt to gravel, winding upward into dense woods. The higher they climbed, the quieter it grew. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. When they parked at the trailhead, Ethan opened her door and helped her out, the perfect image of a dutiful son. "Careful, Mom. Watch your step." She thanked him softly. Always so thoughtful, he grinned, missing the irony completely. They began to climb the steep, narrow path, the sound of crunching leaves underfoot, echoing faintly. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. For the first mile, Ethan and Chloe played the part of affectionate caretakers, asking if she was tired, offering her water, taking pictures of 3 generations of memories. But as they moved deeper into the woods, their energy shifted, their words grew fewer, their glances sharper. Margaret felt it, the calculation in their silence near the summit, where the trees thinned into open cliffs, overlooking the valley. Ethan stopped and pointed toward a flat boulder near the edge. "Mom, let's rest here, the view's perfect." She set her pack down, nodding. "Lovely idea." Chloe pulled out her phone to film the panorama. Ethan knelt beside his backpack, rummaging for something. Then, he handed Margaret a cold bottle of electrolyte drink. "You need to stay hydrated," he said gently. "Here, drink." She accepted it, twisted the cap open, and tilted it just enough to touch her lips. The liquid brushed her tongue, but she didn't swallow. A faint chemical bitterness lingered in the air. She smiled, pretending not to notice. "Thank you, dear," she said softly, lowering the bottle. "You two must be hungry. I brought some energy bars." She reached into her bag and handed them each a wrapper. Both took them eagerly within minutes. Margaret pressed a hand to her forehead, staggering. "Oh, maybe the altitude," she murmured. She let her knees buckle and fell onto the dirt path. Chloe gasped. "It's working," then quickly caught herself, pretending panic. Ethan leaned down, whispering, "Sorry, Mom, you'll understand one day. We need that policy." He started to drag her toward the overlook, but halfway there his grip slackened. He blinked hard, confused. What's happening?" Chloe clutched her throat, gasping. "Ethan, my head." They both collapsed beside her bodies, jerking once before going still. Margaret opened her eyes slowly. She sat up, brushed dirt from her palms and stood. Her heart pounded, but her expression was serene. She looked down at them, her son, her daughter-in-law. 2 people she had once loved beyond reason. "I didn't drink your poison," she whispered. "I just returned it to you." She turned away, slinging her backpack over her shoulder. The valley below glowed in sunlight, peaceful and golden. She began her descent, her footsteps steady. And sure, behind her, the wind carried a faint rustle through the pines, the sound of a past finally dying. By the time Margaret reached the lower ridge, the light had shifted. A pale afternoon sun filtered through the trees, brushing the ground in shards of gold. Her legs trembled from the climb, but her breathing was calm. Every step down the mountain felt like leaving behind a lifetime of regret. The path curved sharply near a stream. That was when she heard it, a faint broken cry echoing from somewhere beyond the rocks. "Help, please!" Her instincts sharpened instantly. Following the sound, she found a man lying half hidden among the brush. His hiking gear was torn, his leg twisted awkwardly, and his face pale with pain. Sir Margaret crouched beside him, her hand steady. "Can you hear me?" He nodded weakly. "I slipped. I think it's broken." She examined the wound quickly, the old nurse inside her awakening like muscle memory. "Stay still," she murmured, using her scarf to stabilize his leg and a branch to splint it. "I'll call for help." Her voice trembled only once when she spoke to the 911 operator, male, late 60s, possible fracture conscious, near Mount Harlan South Trail. She stayed with him, pressing a bottle of water to his lips until the distant hum of the rescue helicopter cut through the silence when the paramedics arrived. They thanked her, insisting she ride down with them. She hesitated but finally climbed aboard, her gaze fixed on the distant ridge, where Ethan and Chloe still lay unconscious in the emergency room. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Margaret sat quietly as nurses moved around her. The injured man was treated nearby. When the bustle settled, he motioned for her to come closer. "I owe you my life," he said, his voice soft but firm names. Dr. Lucas Grant, retired researcher. I was hiking alone, stupid idea. I know. Margaret smiled faintly. "I just did what anyone would," he chuckled. "Anyone know? Most people would have walked past. You stayed." They talked a little while longer, and when the nurse retu. On to adjust his IV, Lucas reached for Margaret's hand. "If there's ever anything you need, just ask. I mean that." She squeezed his fingers gently, not out of need, but gratitude. "I will," hours later, as she prepared to leave her phone, buzzed unknown number. She answered Mom, Ethan's voice hoarse, trembling. "We were in the hospital. Something happened on the trail. You just disappeared." Margaret's expression didn't change. She looked out the window at the sinking sun, calm as glass. "Oh, Ethan," she said softly, "I'm just glad you're safe." "We almost died," he said, voice shaking. "Then maybe," she replied, "it's time you start living differently," before he could respond. She ended the call as she walked out of the hospital. The cool evening wind brushed her face. Behind her, sirens wailed faintly. Someone else's emergency now, not hers. She paused by her car, glanced once at the shadowed ridge of Mount Harlan, and whispered goodbye. Scout. It's done when she drove away. She didn't look back. The road ahead was open, empty, and washed in the soft amber glow of Missouri's fading light. 3 weeks later, the house felt brighter than it had in years. The scent of lavender drifted through open windows, and Margaret's mornings were once again her own. Quiet coffee radio murmuring in the background, sunlight spilling over the dining table. She hadn't heard from Ethan since that brief hospital call, though she had seen his name in the local papers. Business section. His company had lost a major funding contract. The reason listed irregularities in ethics compliance. The sponsor that withdrew the grant foundation. When her phone rang later that afternoon, she almost smiled before she answered. Mom Ethan's voice was strained, small. "Can we come by? Chloe's still weak and we just want to talk." "Of course," Margaret replied gently. "You're always welcome." That evening, as thunder rolled over the Missouri hills, their car pulled into the driveway. Ethan stepped out first, thinner now, face drawn and pale. Chloe followed, sunglasses hiding her eyes. "Oh!" The sky was grey. "Mom?" Ethan began, forcing a shaky smile. "We wanted to apologize for everything." Margaret gestured toward the table. "Sit down. I actually have something for you." Chloe's curiosity sparked. "You do?" Margaret nodded, sliding a thick folder across the table. "You wanted the house, didn't you? I think it's time to settle things properly." Ethan's eyes lit with hope as he opened the folder, only for the colour to drain from his face. A second later, inside were not property deeds, but a stack of debt statements, unpaid taxes, and a legal disclaimer at the bottom of a fake deed for display purposes only, not legally binding. "What is this?" he stammered. Margaret folded her hands neatly on the table. "That's the house transfer you were so eager about it never existed." Chloe's voice rose shrill. "You tricked us." Margaret smiled politely. "You tricked yourselves. You saw what you wanted to see." Ethan pushed back his chair, anger flashing. "I'm your son. How could you do this to me?" Margaret stood calm and steady. "You're right," she said softly. "You are my son by choice." She opened a second envelope and handed it to him. "You might want to read that before you shout again." Ethan tore it open, a printed document stamped and certified a paternity test. He blinked at the words, unable to process them. This can't be real. It is. Margaret said, her voice steady. Your father had an affair before we married. When she left you behind. I raised you as my own. I gave you everything. My name, my home, my life. I never told you, because love shouldn't need a bloodline. But you. She paused, eyes glinting. You made me regret believing love could fix greed. Chloe stood abruptly, trembling. You're lying. Margaret's gaze didn't waver. You can leave now, both of you. Ethan's jaw clenched. Margaret tilted her head slightly. No, dear. I already regretted keeping you long before today. Thunder cracked outside as she opened the door. Neither of them moved at first until she added quietly, but with the weight of a final sentence, get out. Of my house. When the door slammed shut behind them, the silence that followed was the purest sound she had heard in years. She locked it, turned off the porch light, and whispered to the darkness beyond the glass. That chapter's over. The rain came down steadily that night, washing over the front porch and the driveway where Ethan's car had been. Margaret sat in her armchair by the window, watching streaks of lightning flash across the Missouri sky. For the first time in years, she felt no fear, no guilt, only a strange, weightless calm. The next morning brought a phone call from the hospital. The nurse spoke gently, explaining that both Ethan and Chloe had been admitted overnight. Severe exhaustion, dangerously high blood pressure, heart complications, years of bad habits, and stress finally catching up with them. Margaret listened quietly. Will they recover? The nurse hesitated. It's hard to say they may, but they'll never be the same. Margaret thanked her and hung up. By the afternoon she was at the hospital, the air smelled of antiseptic and rain. Inside the dim recovery ward, Ethan lay, pale eyes half open. Tubes ran from his arms, the steady beep of the monitor the only proof of life. Chloe slept fitfully in the next bed, her once perfect hair matted against the pillow. When Ethan noticed her, his lips trembled. Mum. I'm sorry, he whispered, the words barely audible. Margaret stepped closer, her face unreadable. Are you? She asked softly. Or are you just afraid now that you've lost everything? He blinked, tears filling his eyes. I didn't mean for it to go that far. She stopped him with a quiet gesture. No, Ethan, you meant every bit of it. You just didn't expect to lose. He turned away, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Margaret looked at him for a long time, not with hatred, but with something far colder. Understanding. Then she said, almost gently, you should be sorry not for what you lost, but for what you became. She turned and left. Outside in the hallway she paused by the window. The rain had stopped, the sky was clearing, a faint line of gold stretching across the horizon. Waiting near the hospital entrance stood Dr. Lucas Grant, holding a folded umbrella and wearing that same warm, unassuming smile, ready to go home. He asked Margaret, exhaled slowly. Home, she repeated. Yes, I think I am. He opened the car door for her, and together they drove through the quiet streets of Springfield. As the storm clouds drifted away, weeks passed. Margaret's life found rhythm again. Calm mornings with coffee and radio jazz, evenings spent tending to her herb garden. Lucas often visited. Sometimes they cooked together. Sometimes they simply sat on the porch in silence, watching the fireflies emerge at dusk. One evening, as the sun melted behind the fields, Lucas said softly, You seem different now. Margaret smiled faintly. Maybe, because I stopped living for people who never saw me. I thought motherhood meant sacrifice without end, but I learned something. Love without respect isn't love at all. It's slow poison. Lucas nodded, the light catching his eyes, and now she looked toward the horizon, her voice steady. Now I finally live for myself. They sat quietly as the night deepened around them, the sound of crickets rising through the Missouri air. For the first time in her life, Margaret Hollis didn't feel like a mother abandoned or a woman betrayed. She felt something far rarer, free. There comes a moment when a woman chooses herself, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. Margaret's story is not about loss, but rediscovery. She didn't need permission to begin again, only the courage to realize that peace was hers to claim. Because sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is stop waiting to be chosen and choose herself. Thank you for watching this video. Share your thoughts in the comments. I truly value every story and every voice. Don't forget to subscribe to Tears and Strength and share this video with your friends.